Hello and welcome back. In this episode we're going to have a go at making a couple of things, the first being some kind of pool or bath, and the second being a good old-fashioned dungeon well, so this kind of thing. And just like in all the other videos, you can find a PDF file for all of these textures in the description below. Anyway, let's get started. Okay then, for the pool, we'll start by gluing the bottom piece to some foam core, and I've just used some that's 3mm thick in this example, and we'll also glue the top piece to some thick cardboard. Then we'll take a sharp knife and cut out the centre of the top piece, doing our best to be as neat as possible. There we go, and now we'll just trim the outside edge to size. And once that's done, we'll do the same thing with the foam core piece as well. Next we'll measure the thickness of the foam, and it's actually slightly larger than 3mm now, with the paper on top, so we'll take the stone texture and measure out a couple of strips that are the same size. So here I am just testing out the width of the first one, and then measuring and cutting out the second. Like so. Then we can trim off any excess paper, apply some glue to the back, and then start wrapping it around the edge. But one piece is not going to be enough, so we'll also need to roughly measure out how much of the second strip that we'll need, cut that to size, and then glue that in place as well, just like you can see here. And when we're eventually done, it should end up looking something like this. Right then, next we're going to have a go at making the sides, and for this we'll use some foam core again, this time it's 5mm thick, and from that we'll cut a strip that's 1/4 inch wide, which we'll then cut into 4 pieces that are 2 3/8 inch long. Okay, for this next part we'll need the glue gun, and we'll just put a spot of hot glue on the end of one of those pieces, and glue that to the end of another, and as you just saw, I used the grid of the cutting mat to make sure that it was a right angle. Then we'll just repeat the process, all the way around, so that we end up with a nice square frame. And here I am just closing the box with one final spot of hot glue. And there you go, that's the kind of thing we're aiming for. Okay then, next we'll measure and cut out 3 strips of the stone texture that are 1/4 inch wide, i.e. the same width as the foam core strips that we cut out in the last part. And then we'll cut off the excess paper, apply some glue to the reverse side, and start sticking that to the inside of the piece that we just made. Now, this might be a little bit tricky at first, but once it's lined up right, it goes on fairly easy after that. And just like before, one strip isn't quite enough, so we'll need to cut out enough from a second strip to cover the remaining edge. So, if everything's gone according to plan, this is how it should look at this stage. Right then, next we'll do the exact same thing for the outside edge, and this time it should be a lot easier. But just like the inside, one strip isn't quite enough to go all the way around, so we can use the offcut piece to cover the rest. And when we're done, this is the kind of thing that we should be left with. Okay then, now it's time for the assembly. So, here's the top and bottom pieces, and here's the middle piece that we just made. And all we'll need to do now is apply plenty of glue to one of the exposed edges of the foam core, and as you can see I'm just using the glue stick again, but you could use hot glue or PVA if you prefer. Then we'll glue that down to the middle of the base, using the shadow around the edge of the pool as a guide. And the only thing left to do then is to run the glue stick along the underside of the top piece, like you can see here, and then stick that on top of the foam core, making sure that there's an equal overhang on all 4 sides. So there you go, there's the finished pool, and should you need to, it is big enough to fit 4 regular sized miniatures inside, or maybe even one large monster. Okay then, now for the well, and the first thing we're going to do here is roughly cut out all 4 of the hexagon shapes. Next we'll take a piece of thick cardboard and glue on the top and bottom sections. Then we'll take some foam core, I'll be using some that's 5mm thick, and we'll glue the middle 2 sections to that. And we'll then set all of those to one side to dry. Okay, once they are dry, we'll carefully cut out the top piece with a sharp knife, like you can see here. And just like I did with the pool, I find it easier to cut out the inside hole first and then trim it to size. So here I am finishing that off, and there we go. And I've also done the bottom piece off camera just to speed things up a little bit. Right then, next we'll cut out the foam core pieces in a very similar fashion. So here I am doing the inside first again, though don't worry too much if the cuts extend beyond the lines with these, as most of this will be hidden when it's all put together. Anyway, I'll just finish up the outside edge, and we should end up with something that looks like this. And once again, here's the second one, which was done in the exact same way. Okay, next we'll just double check the thickness of the foam, and cut out 2 strips from the stone texture that are the same width. So there we go. Then, just like we did with the base of the pool, we'll cut those to size and wrap them around the outside edges of both pieces, like you can see in this segment here. So here I am finishing off the second one, and we should end up with something like that. Next, we'll apply plenty of glue to the underside of the smaller piece, and then stick that on top of the larger one, making sure that we line up the holes as best as we can. So, something like this. Okay, now for the tricky part. We'll first measure the combined height of our 2 foam core pieces, and we'll then cut out the same width from the stone texture, but this time we'll cut it from the end that contains the dark shadow, so something like that. Then we'll cut a section that's 2.5 inches long, apply some glue to the back of that, and then wrap it around the inside of the hole. As I say, this can be a bit tricky, and here you can see me using a toothpick to help push the texture into all of the corners, but as long as the bottom edge is fairly straight, that's all that really matters. Anyway, when we're done, this is how it should look. Okay, now the only thing left to do is to apply some glue to the bottom of the piece, and then stick that to the middle of the base, like so. Then we'll do a similar thing with the top piece, making sure that we use plenty of glue, and once again I'm just using a regular glue stick for this, and stick that on top. And now that we're finally done, we should be left with a nice little well. However, a well isn't much use without a bucket, so we'll make a start on that next. Okay, before we cut out the texture, we'll first need to score a line down the centre, and once we've done that, then we can cut the whole thing out and trim off a section that's 2.5 inches long. We can then fold that in half, open it back out and apply some glue to the back, and then fold it in half once again. And while it's still wet, we'll also need to wrap it around a pen or similar, like you can see here, just so that it dries with a bit of a curve. But before it's fully dry, we're going to take a regular sized drinking straw, and we'll use that as a kind of jig that we can wrap the texture around. So here I am doing that, but it's best to do a dry fit first, just so that we get a better idea of where the paper starts to overlap itself, as we only really need to apply some glue to that overlapping area, if that makes sense. Then we can simply wrap the texture around the straw, like you can see here, and once we're happy that the edges are nice and straight, it should slide right off the end. And that should give us our basic bucket shape. Okay, next we'll cut out the small wooden texture and a piece of thin cardboard, and we're going to glue equal parts of that texture upon either side of the cardboard, so this kind of thing. Then, when it's fully dry, we'll take a standard hole punch and punch out a small circle, though this can sometimes leave the circle a little bit bent, so here I am just squashing it nice and flat. Next, we'll apply some glue to the bottom edge of the bucket itself, and then simply stick the bottom piece in place. And there you go. That's all there is to it. So, all you need to do now is decide whether you want to glue it to the top of the well, or maybe have it so that it's fallen off to one side. It's completely up to you. That being said, if you really want to go the extra mile, then keep on watching. Okay then, for this next part, you are going to need to go out and buy some brownish coloured cross-stitch thread, like the one you can see here. I think mine cost around £1.50 from eBay. Anyway, from that, we'll cut a roughly 12-inch length, and I don't know if you can see this very well, but it's best to tie a knot in both ends just to stop it from fraying. But obviously, we'll need something to tie the rope to, so we'll cut out this bracket texture here, and we're going to glue that to some thin cardboard. So, here you can see me doing just that, and while it's still wet, we'll take a toothpick and bend the central portion of the texture around that, just to give it more of a bracket shape. So, this kind of thing. Then, once it's fully dry, we'll cut that out with a sharp pair of scissors. Now, we'll also need a handle for the bucket, so we'll take the small metal texture, run the glue stick across the back, and then fold it in half so that we've got a piece of paper with the texture on both sides. Then, once dry, we'll cut out a thin strip that's around 5/8 of an inch long. Oh, and we'll also use the straw again, just to give it a bit of a curved shape. Like so. Okay, next we'll start by tying a knot in one end of the rope, but before pulling it tight, we'll thread the bracket through the middle, like you can see here. Then we'll double up on the knot to make sure it stays in place, and then trim away most of the excess with a sharp pair of scissors. And there we go. Then we'll do a similar thing with the other end and the bucket handle. So, tie a loose knot, thread it through, double up on that knot, trim away the excess, and bend it back into shape. Then all we'll need to do is apply some glue to the inside of each end of the handle and glue that around the top of the bucket. So this kind of thing. But obviously, that's not going to be a great bond. So I also like to coat the knots and the areas where the handle is touching the bucket in a little bit of PVA glue, like you can see here. However, that does mean that it's going to take a little while to dry, so to speed things up, here's one I've made earlier. Okay, this next bit is going to be a bit messy, but basically what we're going to do is put some PVA on our fingers and then run the thread through those fingers so that it gets covered in glue. And as you can tell, I'm taking my time and being fairly thorough when doing this. Anyway, next we'll need to stick down some greaseproof paper to the cutting mat, or parchment paper I think it's sometimes called, obviously depending on where you are in the world. And then we can take a large drinking straw and loop most of the rope around that, like so. And when we slide that off, we should end up with a nice coil of rope. Then, just to get a rough idea of placement, we can position the rope and the other bits and pieces on the well itself. So I think something like this kind of looks okay. And we'll then glue the bracket to the middle of one of the top bricks. And there we go. Then, in this example, I'm going to kind of fold the coiled rope over the steps and then glue the bucket in a suitable place. And once we're happy with that, we can take a toothpick and push the glue-covered rope down onto the well a bit more securely, and also down onto the mat if we want it to spill out over the floor, so that when we're done, we end up with something like this. Though, to finish things off, I also like to add a few spots of PVA glue to the areas where the rope crosses itself, or where it touches the sides of the well, just to make sure that those areas are stuck down really well. Anyway, when it's dry, this is how it should look, and as you can see, the rope has hardened up quite nicely thanks to the PVA, and in my opinion at least, I think the whole thing looks rather nice. So yeah, there's a few more items of scatter terrain to add to the dungeon. I hope you like them, but do feel free to let me know what you think of these in the comments. I do enjoy reading through the comments, and I'll see you next time. Bye for now.